0.5 and zero point 0.2 out of 10 for preseason things, which is so big it survives as 0.5 out of 7 in the combined list. Super Bowl Sunday in February. The first teaser trailer for Lord of the Rings of Power was one of the top 7 news items for A Song of Ice and Fire Game of Thrones fandom across the scale of the entire year. Bigger than most things from within season 1 itself, the later episodes, and this was one of the top 7 moments. Why is that? Well, think back, really pause and think back to where we were last January. Going into 2022, when people were making 2022 prediction videos and major news sites and everything, 2022 was supposed to be the year of Lord of the Rings. This was supposed to be the year of Rings of Power. It was the best show ever, when we didn't know anything about it. Like, House of the Dragon was pretty open about they weren't punishing people for posting leaks because they knew they needed hype to rebuild the franchise. There were no leaks. Up till that first teaser, we knew almost nothing about this show, who anyone was playing. And it was like that thought-terminating cliche thing when it's just catchphrases. You just hear short sound bites and catchphrases. Well, of course Lord of the Rings is going to be the best show of the year. It's the most expensive TV production in history. That catchphrase over and over, it's so expensive. Well, how does that guarantee it's good? Like, it reminded me of Season 8, going into Season 8, that it was the biggest budgeted season ever. And how do you know it's good? They have no idea what they're doing. I just kept saying early, like in January, let's wait for confirmation. I know nothing about the story that they're trying to tell. They're not adapting a book. That Tolkien wrote very little about the Second Age, and I don't blame them for that. That comparing it to House of the Dragon, they had a more difficult adaptation to do. They just had to make up a lot of story elements, for good or bad. Not a lot of source material. That I hate how the hype media, it's not one person directing it, would that it were. The groupthink and echo chamber that news reporting has turned into, that it just became a meme almost, that this will be the year of Lord of the Rings, when we knew nothing about it. There were no photos. We had no idea what story they were telling other than it's the Second Age. Nothing. And there was blind faith that it would be the show of the year. January 2022, it was supposed to be the show of the year, and House of the Dragon was being dismissed as, oh yeah, that they're trying to make another Game of Thrones thing. I'm going to hate watch the first episode, maybe, and then give up on it. That is where we were 12 months ago, last January. And when the first teaser trailer for Lord of the Rings came out at the Super Bowl, it was in one night, in one 5-minute burst, it's like a switch went off. That it was a terrible teaser trailer, and no one had anticipated that. They weren't even waiting for it with anticipation to see if it was good or not. They assumed it would be good. I just remember all the Zoom conferences that major fan sites were holding they had panels ready to dissect it. It was 1 minute long, there was nothing to dissect, and they were slack-jawed. I remember the look on their faces. These are people I respect and still do. I was surprised. I had the same expression. And I must say and stress that that was a bad teaser even relative to the show that ultimately came out. But when I actually saw Rings of Power, it wasn't as bad as that trailer made it look at all. Even later full trailers for it that came out in the summer looked decent. Or at least better than that teaser. That was an awful teaser. It made it look like this weird 80s fantasy thing, which wasn't. But it led to massive backlash. And I was actually, at that point, I oddly switched into being the minority of going, well, the teaser was terrible, but then I've explained this. I went and they gave their first interviews ever, the showrunners, with Vanity Fair and a trio of interviews. And I went, oh, on paper, your ideas for this show aren't that crazy. And that was my reaction to season 1 in a nutshell, that it's just, many of these were good ideas on paper. They were just poorly executed. Please do better in season 2. That I actually had a nuance. It wasn't a dumpster fire of a show. It was a very flawed show. But there were core things that, like, well, that wasn't inherently bad. It's just you didn't do it well. Okay, like, I thought I'd hate the Harfoot storyline, and it was actually presentable. It wasn't $1 billion budget worth of good quality, but I got invested in it. I mean, like it's more like 700 million if you take out the ad money for the advertising campaign. Roughly, Lord of the Rings cost 3 times as much to make as House of the Dragon, and it was not 3 times the quality. It was maybe 90% of the quality of House of the Dragon, and even then, I'm being generous because it is targeted at a younger audience. It's the difference between a PG-13 movie and an R-rated movie. Like the ad campaign for Lord of the Rings showed kids watching it. It was meant to be viewed by children. The same cannot be said of House of the Dragon. So it's unfair to compare their writing quality in a certain, like, they're not shooting that high. But in terms of presentation and everything, just it could have been better, and it wasn't worth the 3 times the budget they put in. So when I say the top 7 news events, I'm using the Super Bowl Sunday first teaser trailer of Lord of the Rings as a catch-all moment encapsulating what was a running theme throughout the rest of 2022 as every new trailer came out. Now, the later trailers for Lord of the Rings were actually better, but it's the blind hype in January, because this show had been in development for 4 years. It's like the mystery box, like the Christmas present that you don't know what's in it, therefore it's got to be amazing when you haven't opened it yet. That the blind faith, that all of that, and they'd seen one teaser for House of the Dragon, which actually looked pretty decent for something with no dialogue in it. It was a short teaser. But then every time a new trailer came out for Lord of the Rings and a new one for House of the Dragon, there were increasingly, it was this process throughout the spring and summer that, like, particularly on my list of the top 10 moments, one of the other ones was the second teaser that actually presented the story of House of the Dragon, which came out in May. People were starting to look at that and going, this looks better than the trailers for the Lord of the Rings. Even though, like, the second Lord of the Rings teasers with Galadriel and stuff and real dialogue looked better by the summer, they didn't look as good as House of the Dragon. So it was that fate or providence that not only... What would it have been like if the first Lord of the Rings teaser was a reasonable presentation of the quality level that we actually got? Because people were expecting an 11 out of 10. The actual show, I will generously say, was a 7 out of 10, and the teaser made it look like a 3 out of 10. So within one night, people expecting an 11 out of 10 thought this show looks like a 3 out of 10, and were horrified and stunned, genuinely stunned. So that actually led people talking about Lord of the Rings versus House of the Dragon, the Super Bowl teaser. That is why I do include it in this list of news for us, because it really, on a meta level, macro level, shifted how the news was treating these two competing franchises. That, remember in the summer they kept hyping up, it's going to be the Battle of the Fantasy Titans between the Lord of the Rings and House of the Dragon, once they had seen more trailers for it. Last January, they would not have framed this as the Battle of the Fantasy Titans. They didn't see it as a competition. They thought Lord of the Rings was going to be this movie-quality 8-episode show that would curb stomp what was already going to be a failure on its own terms, much less competing. That House of the Dragon is going to be as bad as Season 8 was. Lord of the Rings show will be amazing simply because it's expensive. There was no talk of a Battle of the Fantasy Titans before that Super Bowl teaser. Then that started shifting the narrative. People started wondering. Then 3 months later, another House of the Dragon longer trailer comes out that by the summer, they were starting to phrase this as the Battle of the Fantasy Titans. And then I wouldn't say House of the Dragon curb-stomped Lord of the Rings, but it clearly won on its own, relative to what it set for itself. Lord of the Rings didn't achieve its own goals. I wouldn't say it was terrible. Like, if their goal was a 10, they did like a 7. And rarely am I this on the fence about a show where I'm like, do better in Season 2, but I'm not willing to totally give up on you. So some of the core ideas here weren't too crazy. They were very poorly executed. Like, anything with the Halbrand storyline was god-awful. The other parts, I was surprised, this is surprisingly good, like Arondir and the Southlands, or the Harfoots, or the Dwarves even, were enjoyable. And I think they meant this to be a binge release show, not weekly episodic, because they commissioned it 4 years ago when they were still doing dump everything at once. Like The Boys season 1 was dumped on a single day in the old Netflix binge model. Then season 2 of The Boys shifted to episodic. I think Lord of the Rings was so slow because they wanted it to be binged, not episodic, and they could adjust that for season 2. I wish they'd just admit that. Well, when we thought it was a long movie, not episodic. Fine. But I thought I'd hate the invented characters. The worst part was when they took established characters from the Galadriel storyline of Numenor and condensed it very badly. But they were surprisingly capable of making decent plot lines invented from thin air, like the Harfoot stuff. But I encapsulate that entire year-long experience of the comparison with Lord of the Rings as what really started that shift. And it was a really hard shift the night of Super Bowl Sunday, when people saw this isn't the perfect Lord of the Rings show. No one trailer for House of the Dragon had that much impact because people still needed to warm up to it. I mean, they go, well, that was a good trailer, but does that reflect how good the show will be? I have trepidation about this. But every trailer that came out looked better and better, and people gradually warmed up to it. Is it easier to lose reputation than it is to slowly build reputation? I don't know. So, in my chronological list of the top 10 preseason moments, that was chronologically number 2. And yes, in terms of impact, more than a lot of things in season 1, the Super Bowl teaser for Lord of the Rings is a catch-all for, as the year progressed, the trailers looked really good for one and not the other, and the news, their predefined narrative that this is the year of Lord of the Rings, shifted into the year of the Battle of the Fantasy Titans, then after fall shifted into this was the year of House of the Dragon. That is 0.5 out of 7 on my list here of the top 7 things.